Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with Mitch J, George Ortega, and Jamie Soden. And in this episode, we're going to talk about people and their need to feel special and things that conflict with their feeling that they're special in some way that makes them different and unique. They get their self-esteem out of that, they get their value out of that. And so certain ideas that make them feel special, they want to believe those. And so one example is, for example, free will belief, because that's sort of the theme of our podcast, obviously, is humans, they want to think that, well, humans have a free will, that humans have evolved this sort of free will ability that allows them to override nature, and that's what makes them great. And this is often used as a way of saying that humans matter more than other animals, which is a common thing there. And it also fits into another hotly debated topic about evolution. People, they don't like the idea of being genetically related or descended from other sorts of organisms, especially bacteria and stuff, and they don't want to think that they're related to other monkeys out there. And I've had a lot of time to think about this and like, well, why is this? Why is it that people need to feel that they're better or they're more special than something else? Can they find meaning in their life that does not require this special feeling? And I know that Mitch has brought this up before. You know, humans, they want to believe that they have something extra that somehow makes them human or makes their life meaningful. And when somebody comes along and tries to explain why free will is an illusion or talks about evolution or whatever the case may be, challenges their belief that their self-esteem depends on, well, then they sort of react and don't want to talk to you and they get all mad. So, guys, can you think of examples of this where people that they have this rage at someone challenging a belief that their whole worth depends on?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Very well said, Chandler. As you've just said, one of the reasons some people have such a strong negative emotional reaction to this logical investigation of free will, which leads to the conclusion that free will does not exist, can't exist, is nonsense, is these inherent beliefs. And one of these beliefs, like you said, is this idea that they want to feel special. Another more obvious belief system is religion. Sometimes a belief in free will can conflict with someone's religious beliefs. And a third kind of belief, which is really a logical fallacy, is this just world hypothesis. This idea that good and evil is sort of balanced in the world, and when someone does something good, they sort of earned it. And when someone does something bad, it's because what goes around comes around, this sort of karmic force that keeps society even. Of course, as free will skeptics, we don't just say that free will doesn't exist. We also logically examine the consequences of understanding that free will is an illusion. And that's the part that I think people don't like. People think that they're going to lose hope, and that when they lose one of these beliefs, they'll be left with nothing to replace it, and that it'll take away meaning from their lives. So yeah, people think they need to feel unique instead of appreciating uh, how profoundly lucky they are. So that's another way to think about it, right? If you don't control what happens to you, then if you were in a very fortunate position, one way psychologically to deal with that is you could say, well, I'm overjoyed by the profound luck I have. You know what I mean? It's like winning the lottery. You know what I mean? No one gets upset because they go, I didn't control the fact that I won the lottery. Some people who are a little bit out there think they controlled it, but people are often overjoyed by the fact they've come across a fortune when they win the lottery. and they don't need to know that they earned it. So that might be one way to help people cope with this perceived loss.
I completely agree about that, Mitch, because when people are lucky in some way and something good happens to them, why would they be upset that it wasn't up to them? If they got something that makes them happy, who cares?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, I think, part of it may be we're just like conditioned. Think of our education. Um, it teaches us to compete with each other. It's not just our education, our sports. Our whole society is based on competition, on outdoing your opponents, on just like being better so that you can get the better job, so you can get the more attractive woman. I mean, this is like we are really strongly conditioned for this. And so like I think along with this conditioning is that like that basically what we do reflects who we are. And like for example, to the extent that we don't have a free will, that it's all luck, all of a sudden all this pride and like perhaps some of the benefits that are supposed to derive from this competition, a lot of it just doesn't make sense anymore, and then people are afraid of that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the answer, I guess, like, because it's going to take time to recondition society to a different, more enlightened way. And so part of our problem, so yeah, fine, we're confronted with that, and people have been this way for millennia, at least, 2, 3 thousand years at least, I would guess. Um, the question is like, what kind of message do we deliver to people to kind of like say, oh, fine, you're giving something up, but what you're gaining is much more valuable.
You're right, George. We have to put a positive message out there because people they don't like the idea of well, whenever you try to say explain why you don't have free will or you or whatever it may be, whatever specialness they thought that they had, some ability, they don't want to hear what they don't have or what they can't do. They want to hear what they do have. They want to hear a positive message,
That's a good point.
and so I think we really need to give them something. And here's my thoughts about what I've found, how I've benefited from it anyway, is just the sense of being connected with all things, realizing I'm part of a causal chain, just like everything else is. It makes me feel like, well, I don't have to be special. I don't have to be more or less special than anything else is. We can just all be special, and that's fine with me, you know?
In a certain sense, some people will take what we're saying as meaning that, we are not really people, we're things. Biologically, we're atoms or we're neurons, there's biochemistry, and we're just like, we're material. But, it kind of like that view kind of like denies us our personhood. So then the question is like, how do we, both explain to people that nothing is up to us, but then retain our sense of personhood?
Well, that's a good question, George, because personhood is a really bizarre concept. Like, for example, there will be something where someone declares some gorilla gives it legal personhood or whatever, and then people are saying that that's outrageous because only humans can be persons, and like, what is this thing about personhood that people are obsessed with?
Yeah, we're obsessed with ourselves. Is the point? Humans are. I mean, here's the truth. Here's the cold hard truth. Humans are just really smart animals. That's it. We're just animals that are really, really smart, and we can do a lot of really, really cool stuff. And we get carried away because we are so intelligent, because we can control our environment. We sometimes forget where we are in the grand scheme of things. Um, so yeah, we put too much emphasis on ourselves. I
Yeah,
think, but I think as determinists, we have to understand that where we are at this point in time is where we have to be at this point in time. So like sometimes I get frustrated by technology or politics. I should say the lack of certain technological advancements and politics. But when I have my more calm, rational moments, I realize, we really haven't been around that long. And perhaps if the human species flourishes and propagates and goes on for millennia, this time right now, 2016, will just be seen as another part of our dark ages. So this is really, we're still in the dark ages, in other words, in a sense. And hopefully we live long enough to understand that. So, sometimes we get very critical of where humans aren't, but perhaps this is the pace we must be on. And we need to recognize that that's just the truth of reality.
Well, that's very good, Mitch. I think that humans, they want to think of themselves as the final stage, like that all those other things that happened in the past,
Right,
that oh, they weren't the finished product, but we're the finished product and we're perfect or something crazy like that. They,
right.
they don't want to think of themselves as just one step in a chain towards something that eventually might be a lot smarter than what humans are now. And believe me, it wouldn't take very much because I don't think humans are that smart. Most of them haven't figured out they don't have a free will.
Right, and humans just want to be human. Like you guys are talking about personhood. There's a certain element of humanity that might be linked to ignorance. It honestly you know, might be ignorance. And even though it's ignorance, even though it's a negative thing, people want it. It's illogical, but it's true.
Well, as the old saying goes, ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, and notice that saying is an Orwellian saying. So it's during this fascist era in the world, we saw how scary a dystopia could be. We saw all these fascist countries in Spain and Germany, and we said we're afraid that if we try to build an ideal society, it will come at the cost of human rights, of civil liberties, of privacy, and that's the sort of general feeling that's in the zeitgeist currently, right? People think that being human means this. It means a certain degree of error. And even though error is objectively wrong, human beings fear that if they don't have some of that error, they will lose their humanity and we will devolve into some chaotic, dystopic nightmare. And this is the thing, right? It's like, nah, you gotta have free will. And if you don't have free will, you have to believe you have free will, or else you're not a human being.
It is really funny because isn't it interesting how what you said about error there? Like people want to retain their error because the idea of being perfect, a machine that always
Yes, yes.
functions a certain way, um, well, then it's almost like for them, the idea of error and being able to make choices seem to go together for them. And I just think about it from such a reverse standpoint. This is obviously just the way I'm wired, as I think, well, if I had a choice, I would be without error. I would always do that which is the most logical or that which I desire
Yep.
to do. I would not make mistakes.
I
Right.
think there's a similarity. Basically, I think it's a case of sour grapes. The idea, and like it's also mirrored in terms of happiness. Um, Great happiness, bliss for most people is something that they can't envision. That as hard as they try, they know they won't be able to get there, or at least that's what they think. So that they say to themselves,
That's a good
"Well,
point.
actually, my life wouldn't be meaningful without the pain, without the suffering," because they can't, find that bliss. They don't think it's possible. And I think it's the same thing with perfection. They think that, to a certain extent, could be correct about the first part. We can't be perfect. We can't be perfectly happy. So, but like, that doesn't mean that we have to embrace this imperfection, that we have to, like, that we kind of like give up our striving for it. But again, pulling it back to the free will thing, what do so like the other part of it is, I mean, there's several dimensions. The other dimension is, like, people don't want to be things, and, like, basically we're telling people that nothing is up to them, and, like, when we say that, what they hear is like, well, that means we're no different than a rock or a puppet or a computer. And so, how do we kind of like maintain or restore their sense of personhood while explaining to them that absolutely that they are, in a very real sense, no different than puppets.
Well, I think one way to help explain their relevance, because that's another issue, another word that sort of fits along this. They want to be relevant. Is pleasure and pain. Pleasure and pain. So, for example, whether or not you believe in free will, you are not going to start stabbing yourself in the eyeballs. You're not going to do that. So that knowledge will not lead you stabbing yourself in the eyeball. So what does that mean? That means there's something visceral, something real that is linked to pleasure and pain. So if you are fortunate to live your life and you just get a whole bunch of pleasure and fulfillment and then you die, that's what life is. That's what reality is. And this is, I think, what we have to really be focused on. We should be focused on maximizing not just our own pleasure, but maximizing the pleasure of all sentient and conscious things that exist. I think that's a worthwhile goal, and it's the realest reality there is, because we would not puncture our eyelids with needles. And that's what it is. It's like, it's a little bit axiomatic, but we know that.
Well,
If
yeah. I
if
think
this if this sorry, just 1 second. If this hopelessness, right, led to us being able to just torture ourselves and suddenly be able to withstand the pain, I think then you could say everything is really meaningless. But the fact that we must move away from pain, I think that really enhances this feeling of being alive. That's all life is really about. That's where the fulfillment comes in. That's where our motivations stem from.
Yeah, well, I agree, Mitch, and I think that George would agree because he says, happiness is what it's all about. It really is about
And
pleasure.
he's right. He's right.
Yeah. I mean, so, and it doesn't take away our pleasure in doing the things that we like. And sure, like George said, yeah, we're things, but hey, we know we're things, and that's cool.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the message, Darwin, Freud, Einstein, people that are respected for doing great things, understood that we don't have a free will. um, I think maybe we need to explain that, listen, we don't have a free will, but knowing this, does not have to prevent us from being as happy as we can be or want to be. Maybe
Right.
that's the key message.
I just thought of something incredible. Somebody could feel happy about how lucky they are to be conscious to the point where they can understand that nothing's up to them. Because that's you have to be very lucky to be able to understand that.
Yeah. I certainly am. I mean, that's that. I think that describes swimming. I'm very like I certainly gain fulfillment in knowledge. I mean, it's beautiful. It's, as a human being, it feels great to know you're right, or to at least think you're right. It's
Yeah.
one of the greatest things you can feel. I think this is what, I mean. You hit the nail on the head, Chandler. This is what gives comfort, for example, to a lot of atheists. So when you're an atheist, the big thing you lose is heaven. You don't get heaven anymore, and you don't get any comfort for what happens after you die. You know, like, I know very few people who would say I don't want to go to heaven or a place like heaven. Why would you not want to live in eternity in a better existence with more pleasure and all your. Of course, you want that. I know a few people don't, but you would imagine most people do want that.
Yeah,
But
well, I totally relate to what you're saying, Mitch, because that, I mean, for a lot of people, that is a bummer. That for them, they don't want to hear about the idea. They don't even somebody who proposes the idea that there's no afterlife, they don't want to hear that because for them, they get so much hope and meaning out of the idea that things will be better after they die. And I kind of found a problem with it. I mean, because if the whole point of your life, if the meaning of your life comes from having another life after you die, then that your afterlife is that meaningless without an afterlife.
I don't think so. I don't think so. It's just like saying you get to play this game, you get to play this video game now, and later on you get to play a better game. You know what I mean? I don't think that sounds pretty good to me. I don't really see any problem there. Um,
Yeah, the reason
that's
why Chandler Klebs plays, well, Terraria, for example, is because it gives him pleasure. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but I think here's an interesting thought, guys, related to the afterlife thing. Imagine, what if somebody imagines different scenarios and they try to imagine, well, if there is an afterlife, how do I feel about that? If there is not an afterlife, how do I feel about that? And ask themselves the question, can they find pleasure no matter what the truth is? Can they still find pleasure in their life now and enjoy the current game they're in?
it's. I mean, like I happen to be an atheist, but even I have moments where I'm like, this feeling of consciousness is so pervasive and so persistent. It really seems strange for me to think that at one point it's just going to suddenly go away. But when I look at the history of human beings and I look at all the negative things that have happened to people over time, and the people who've had just insufferable existences or died after a very short period of time, that sort of grounds me to reality. That's what brings me back when I think about other people.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about it, Mitch, is that right now, as you know, I'm also atheist and I don't believe in an afterlife. What's particularly interesting about it is that I find like I guess I find it hard to make a claim that I'm some special thing and that I have an afterlife without also granting an afterlife to every earthworm and every bacteria and every insect and every other life form because I realize I'm basically made out of the same stuff. I'm made out of life stuff, whatever you call it,
It's
whatever.
called carbon.
Yeah, carbon. Yeah, so it's like, so is like my thing is okay, either all the carbon either all the carbon gets an afterlife or none of it does, because otherwise it's just not right. It's unequal.
So yeah, if you become an atheist, you lose heaven. You lose heaven, and that's a lot to lose. Losing heaven is a lot to lose.
Well, I mean, another part of our challenge is that, like, 80, 90% of people here in the United States are at least spiritual. They believe in a higher power. And what we're telling them is, we're absolved, we're innocent, we don't do any evil. We do whatever, you know, we're compelled to do this evil. So then in most people's minds, that means, oh my God, rather than having this, this benevolent, loving, caring being, creator, everything that's caring for us, now all of a sudden they have to deal with like this controlling entity that's good sometimes, but completely horrible other times. It's understandable how that's a challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I think that George, like you mentioned, people they need to believe in a God that's all good, because the alternative for them is a horror beyond all imagination. Because if God can be bad, well then God can can just send everyone to hell or some form of torture. You don't have anything to trust and no grounding if you just think that um like each morning when God wakes up, some days he's grumpy and punishes everyone, and you know what I mean. That's chaotic, and it's a scary thought. And
Right, and atheism, I think, is a similar threat to a lot of people for a similar reason. In other words, like, atheism means that, like, oh my God, this is a universe that just doesn't care. It's like a caring, it's
Right.
just like it's indifferent, and
It
that's just as scary.
goes back to the just world fallacy. The idea that that somehow everything you get is a result of the actions you took, and you were able to control those actions. Right? So sometimes here's an example I use that really illustrates that we actually know the just world fallacy is a fallacy, that why it's nonsense. People actually know if they take the time to think about it. Poor people. There are situations where we don't blame people for being poor. We understand all the events that led to that person being impoverished, where they grew up, um, the opportunities they didn't have, blah blah blah, etc. Their race, whatever the racial uh, stigmas that occur at that time are. And other times, we want to blame people for not taking advantage of those opportunities. So it's like we want to put a line in the sand. We want to say there must be a situation, there must be some situations where you can control this, or else what kind of horrible world are we living in? I, it's like people are willing to say, okay, sometimes um, you don't have control, but there must be some situations where we can start saying, you're responsible, you're accountable, you did this, you could have done something else, but you didn't. If not, what is life about, And this is the big threat. So any logician who understands why the just world hypothesis is ridiculous should be able to extend that train of thought to completely and totally reject free will.
Well, yeah, and here's the deal. Even people who still believe in free will, even people who don't get it, would still have to admit that there is definitely suffering that comes upon people that they did not choose. When a natural disaster strikes, or somebody else kills them, the point is, we everybody knows at some level that things happen to you that you don't deserve, but not everybody takes it to its full logical conclusion, realizing that all
Yep,
of us, everything we get, we don't deserve.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, like, if we're going to deliver our message that we don't have a free will, I think we really have to go strong with, like, fine, like, because the other part of this is, like, most people, especially with new age stuff and, modern psychology, Maslow and all, most people believe that life is about getting better and better. It's just like, achieving, accomplishing, becoming
Yeah.
accomplished, you know, um, perfecting oneself, or at least going in that direction. When we tell them, yeah, you can do that, but it's not really up to you whether you either decide to do that or not, or succeed with it or not.
Yep.
All of a sudden, the personal goals they have, with the perspective, that they use to see them and interpret them, they're no longer there, and so we really do have to come up with, or stress the idea that, like, I think it's very Buddhist. It's like, that our goals, our desires, our cravings, our wants and stuff, these are kinds of things that cause suffering. So, like, the way to find this great happiness is to just, see reality at a more fundamental level than that. And so, I think we have to stress that we can be happy without, our goals, without our, personal self, the perspective of personal self. And yeah, I'm wondering how tightly we have to, like, blend the two messages. If we're going to, like, take something that's people, just seem to feel they need so much and value so much, I guess we kind of have to give them something in return that, that they can value more, just to at least focus them on it.
Yeah, because yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, the hedonic imperative or the pleasure principle guarantees that we'll keep moving towards greater pleasure because that's what we're already programmed to do. And so, in a way, we do keep improving and getting better at happiness, and it doesn't require free will. So, I don't think people need to be afraid of anything.
Yeah.
I agree. It's like, we have, like, wars like World War One and Two and stuff, and like in the scheme of things, they're kind of like really bad days, like that, we're going in the right direction, things are getting better, we're becoming more civilized, more compassionate and all, but we backslide. We do have our challenges.
Yeah, that was a big backslide.
Oh yeah. Now we got to face climate change.
um, I think you just mentioned something that would be very good for a future topic. We can talk about the self. I have a feeling that we'll be in a lot of agreement about the self because I think this Buddhist notion of being disassociated from the self, and like you said, George, finding happiness in that's a way to give people hope. I think that's exactly it. If Buddhists can understand why losing the self is actually a good thing, maybe we can extend some of those Buddhist notions to give people a sort of philosophy that they can go by that gives them comfort.
That's excellent, because yeah, because obviously, an implication of our not having a free will is that we really don't have a personal self in the way we tend to think we do. So you're right. To the extent we abandon that, I think a lot of our pain comes from this quote unquote ego, this sense of a personal self that, like, that we're invested in. And yeah, and the Buddhists are very good at that. So that's another kind of major theme I think we have to tie into this.
Yeah, I think that's very important because the very concept of competition and being better than others, and yeah, it requires there to be a self that's a persisting self that somehow it would have to defy all laws of nature for there to be a self. It makes no sense.
Tell me about it. Um, yeah, okay.
So, Jamie, did you have anything to say about our strange conversation in this podcast?
No, sorry, it's late at night here, and I wasn't really following a lot of it. So
Oh yeah, I understand. It's way later where you
Wow,
are.
you're at like 1 o'clock. I hear you.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So Jamie's tired.
no hard feelings, people.
Yeah,
No, no,
I know.
understandable. Hey,
Yeah, well, yeah, I think we have a positive message for people, and I'm sure we'll continue to improve on it. But I guess we can end this episode.
sounds good.
Sounds good.
All right. You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion, and I've been talking with Mitch J and George Ortega and, well, a little bit of Jamie Soden, but he's tired. And and we've been talking about, people and their need to feel special and them getting meaning in their life. And they have this feeling that they're losing something when they are told they don't have a free will. And we're trying to explain that there's a lot you gain from this understanding, and we'll continue this exploration in future episodes. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.